Hi everyone. I just want to have one last summing up of the loanable funds model. So we went through a couple of examples, as you know, of here's your demand curve, here's your supply curve for the loanable funds model. Right? And you have the real interest rate as the price on the vertical axis, and the quantity of loanable funds is on the horizontal axis. Now I went through two different changes of changes in equilibrium, two different examples of changes in equilibrium. One was what happens if there's an increase in government spending, and that shifted the supply curve to the left. Well, obviously, a decrease in government spending would have the effect of shifting the supply curve to the right. Likewise, I went through an example of an increase or optimism of firms, so the demand about the future, so they wanted to invest more, so the demand curve shifts to the right. Likewise, if firms became pessimistic about the future, the demand curve would shift to the left. All right. Now, if you notice and you go through the two examples that I did, each one of those shifts that I actually did showed a shortage in the market, and so real interest rates would rise, and the increase in real interest rates would cause you to move towards equilibrium. So what you want to do to test to see if you really understand this is work through the examples as I did them in the lectures, but then ask yourself the next step. What happens if the demand curve, or what happens if instead of the demand curve shifting to the right because firms become optimistic, what happens if the demand curve shifts to the left because they become pessimistic? In that case, there should be a shortage that gets created at the initial real interest rate, so banks would then bid down the real interest rate, and that would move you towards equilibrium. Likewise, what would happen if instead of increasing government spending, the government decreased government spending? That would shift the supply curve to the right, which would create, again, a shortage at the initial real interest rate. So not all banks that want to make loans could get loans at the current real interest rate, so banks would have an incentive to bid down real interest rates, and that would move you towards equilibrium. So the way to start studying for the exam is to go ahead, work through the examples I did, then go through and work through the two examples I just mentioned. Make sure you can do an example where the change causes a shortage, and then make sure you can do an example of where the change creates a surplus, and then start asking yourself what-if questions. Well, what if one of these other things changes? Suppose taxes change, suppose transfer payments change, and see if you can work through those. And I will point out one thing. Corporate taxes are an interesting example because changes in corporate taxes affect not just after-tax profits for firms and therefore affect the demand curve, but they also affect government revenue and therefore national savings. So changes in corporate taxes are likely to affect both curves, so that's a slightly more complicated question. So that's something you might want to think about.